So today we're talking about signals to strategy. Now, how do you navigate the future with more confidence, right? All of us try to plan, and here will be some tools that will offer you to think about how you plan for your business and bringing new products to market, and even, a whole new business offering if that's what you're interested in. So, how do you do that more successfully? And what we'll cover today is sort of thinking about how to use strategic foresight for anticipating new opportunities and risk, evaluating strategic plans. So you may already have a strategic plan in place, and you really want to vet and evaluate that in a meaningful way. Then developing new offerings and also developing internal readiness to bring new products and services to market. There's 4 different key areas that are really part of the foresight process. Prepare some of the foresight models themselves, thinking about insights, and then bringing things to action. Today, we're really going to focus on part 1 of this. We only have an hour, and so just thinking about giving you meaningful information without sort of bombarding you with the whole model, but we did want to sort of call that to your attention. And so as we think about the preparatory part, that prepare phase, we want to orient toward the future. We want to look back to look forward, identifying drivers of change. We'll talk about signals of change and then framing future conversations. So I'm going to hand it off to Rebecca now to talk a little bit about diving into more detail.
Thank you, Kelly. And I just noticed a little typo. We had the number 3 on the previous slide that showed the framework for foresight. We should have put insight. So basically prepare, foresight, insight, and action. So just to get us kicked off, this is super casual, but we're going to talk a little bit about just how to get in the mindset. So before we would engage in any kind of foresight effort, we have to first kind of cleanse our mind. And so this exercise is called Future Focus Forward, and we're just going to do it together, and takes a little bit of time to put some comments in the chat. But this is also something that you could use with a group of stakeholders that you're preparing to work with on a project or something like that. So the exercise is called Orient to the Future. And the purpose is to take the pulse of our attitudes on this call. And the idea is that since we all have different relationships with the future, some see it as filled with opportunity and a positive, and others find it very worrying. And this session should help us to kind of understand more our own perspectives and our assumptions and those of the people in the room, in the webinar, or in a project. So I want you to kind of think about the first thing I would say is think about how, in order to think about the future, we have to actually acknowledge that things can be different. And then in terms of thinking about things that are different, we already have our own biases. You know, some of us might be thinking that certain things can't be different, that economics aren't going to change, that politics aren't going to change. But we may have blind spots, and this is going to help us identify our blind spots. So let's open up the chat, and I'm going to give you a prompt and think about, imagine in the next 10 years, do you see the world getting better or the world getting worse? And you don't have to say why or in the chat. You can just basically, we'll just do a quick poll of, is it getting better? Is it getting worse?
It's weighing toward worse, although a few people are saying better, so that's, inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say it's almost 50-50 split.
Yeah, people are saying that it's 50-50.
Okay, so, and we'll go through a couple more prompts, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat. And don't be shy. The next prompt is, I believe, and this is from your perspective, I believe the world is getting more or less equitable with regards to race, gender, and wealth. And there's no right or wrong answer. The purpose is not to have a big discussion here. It's just to take the pulse of the people in the room. That will really help you prepare for how to actually engage with whatever stakeholders you're working with, or even yourself.
It seems like in general, the perception is less equitable.
Interesting.
There's a couple people weighing in for more.
Yeah, it looks like people are saying like 50-50, the more or less.
Okay, and we'll move on to number 3, the last one. These are 3 prompts that you can kind of keep in your back pocket. I think technology is bringing us closer together or pushing us further apart. What do you think?
Together, apart, split again. Both in different ways. I think that's a great point. Like,
Yep.
depending on your relationships, it could vary, pushing us further apart. This is nice because in each one of these, we've had both sides of the equation,
Exactly.
50-50.
Okay, feel free to continue to populate the chat, no problem. I just want to say kind of in conclusion, this should help you, I mean, it should help you prepare to how to talk to a group of stakeholders or how to think about your own business and even like think about your own biases. Because when we're thinking about the future, we want to, although we know it's going to be different, there's no way around that. We have to think through like how is it going to be different and what might that look like? And just then our job as foresight practitioners or people thinking about the future to work on new opportunities is for us to kind of identify our blind spots and then go after some research to understand them a little bit more and neutralize them. So thank you for taking the time to add that to the chat. Kelly, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, as Rebecca talked about, this is a great sort of almost warm-up practice so that um, the prompts could be different, but something that really pushes people to at least share their feelings around what they're anticipating in the future is a great way to start any session.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Great. Okay.
All right. So the next exercise or to prepare for looking at the future is called looking back to look forward. And it's a very common model used in futuring programs and schools that teach strategic foresight. And this is where we really want to look at trends, patterns, and data versus like our own biases. So you can use quantitative data, you can use qualitative data. It's really great to use a combination of both, but you want to use all those things as inputs to start imagining and developing your vision for the future. And pretty much you're always going to be thinking in a 5 to 10 years out kind of perspective. In general, I'll just say this, like things are moving so fast in our world. A lot of times, a lot of people who are like, for instance, in healthcare, where it's very risk oriented, they're often just thinking 1 to 3 years in advance. And that's actually okay. But kind of the golden rule is try to think 5 to 10 years. And if you're really wanting to go far out in the future, sometimes people will think 20. But from there, you can actually use that information to convert your actual vision to some type of strategy. So the idea of all of this is always to take action versus just us talking about it. Like in business, in the business world, we're trying to actually do something. Even in social realms right now, we're trying to actually do something. Okay. And here's an example of what looking back to look forward looks like. Sometimes this can be called an era analysis. It's very similar. Basically, it's just the idea of not working in a vacuum. So in this particular instance, these were examples from the future of work, the future of HR. And if you go back to the 80s, and you always want to go 20 years back, or at least 20 years back, again, a common example in innovation. In the 80s, PeopleSoft came out, and PeopleSoft was a basic HR platform that you could use to look at payroll and manage employee data. And then the developments from PeopleSoft led to a product called UltraPro that enhanced interactivity. And then we go to the 2000s, and all of that made us start to develop platforms like Workday that could leverage advanced analytics and help HR programs use data-driven decision making. And then in the 2000s, you have cloud-based solutions just simply because technology changed. And we have Teams. A good example would be Teams for the 20s. We were able to do more real-time collaboration. So by being aware of what happened in the past, we can kind of better prepare for the future or think what the possibilities might actually be. And then this is the beginning of the kind of data that you want to start to assemble. So generally for the patterns and the trends, you're going to be looking at drivers of change. You're going to be looking at signals. So the drivers of change are really the fundamental forces that are shaping our world. They range from technology and demographics to climate and economics. And in a couple of slides, we'll show you a framework that you can use to think about it so that you're having a comprehensive understanding of the drivers of change. Sometimes you'll hear drivers of change called just drivers. Sometimes you'll hear them called forces. And they're a little bit different than trends. But this again allows us to imagine future possibilities. So at the bottom, you'll see a couple of examples. One is like the rapidly aging population. There's an increase in baby boomers. That's the biggest demographic, and that's changing a lot of things about our world. A desire for immersive experiences. That's from going to movies, and you see that a lot in hospitality and retail, and that's really influencing how we have user experiences and how we, even like in sports, VR and AR making us want more, making not just want, but expect different immersive experiences. And then just, I would say, the explosion of connected devices. So like Apple Watches and Fitbits and Aura Rings and all the different withing scales, all the different devices that are connecting to provide data for us to be able to make more detailed decisions about our health. And then this is the framework. And there are many, many frameworks, but this is just a very basic one. It's called STEEP. And the reason you want to use a framework when you're looking at drivers and signals is that you want to, again, take a comprehensive look at a domain or a space that you want to build a business or create an opportunity in. So you're going to be looking at analogous industries. You're going to be really make sure that you are getting data from all these different areas. You want information and drivers and signals from social, and all these are also external influences. You're really trying to, I don't know if is there a question or comment?
No.
Okay, thank you. You want to look outside of the business. So you're not trying to take the pulse of these things within the business. You're trying to look outward because that's a tenet of innovation. You're looking out in the world to see what is actually out there, and how you can be innovative. So for social, it's things like what is originating from society and consumers, what are cultural shifts, what are societal patterns. Like one right now is just the increase in protests, at least in the United States. That's definitely something that's happening in Minnesota. Technological is not just about technology itself. It's about how the advancements in technology, the increase or the decrease in patents, the rates of change, how much is being invested. It's always really good to look at what's being invested. Availability and even like the ability of businesses to adopt new technology. Because, if they're not able to adopt something, it's not really going to stick. And then economic is really just fluctuation, shifts, financial trends, what's happening with taxes and inflation, consumer spending. Are people spending money right now? Is a good thing. And then environment and political policy. And I'll just say about environment, it's not just about, say, the amount of water, the actual environment. It can be about sustainability. It can be the influence of a natural disaster on supply chain and demand, on policy changes, natural resources, etc. So that's a basic framework.
And what I was putting in the chat as I was asking folks if they tried any of these frameworks
Oh.
before. So one person had used Pestle in the past. And so I was trying to get a sense of people's familiarity with some of the frameworks for this.
Great. Thank you, Kelly.
Okay.
Yeah, you can use Pestle, you can use Steeple. They all work. At the last organization I worked at, which was in healthcare, we developed our own framework and included healthcare. So think about that. The signals of change are, to me, the most fun. And as a person who loves innovation, like signals of change are really one of these, they're basically early indicators of change. And with the goal of identifying signals is that you should just be looking at so many signals around you in all those categories and in your daily life that you just become hyper aware. So people who are very, very like really good at kind of looking at the trends, looking at the signals, are constantly noticing things. It could be when you walk down the street, when you shop in the grocery, like even what things show up on the shelves in the grocery store can be a really good indication, or how like cities are designed. But they should be concrete, they should be current, and they should be compelling. And in general, you can look at for sources, you can look at articles, you can look at TED Talks, you can look at conferences, webinars. Like you want to kind of get your signals from industry papers. You want to get your signals from more less common sources. So it's actually really great if the signals are more on the fringe, or they might be a little bit odd or weird. They haven't become mainstream yet. So an example of a signal, and I will say people often have a hard time with signals, so don't be shy. If you have questions, put them in the chat. Here's some signals. There's a pharmaceutical company that started Meow One, which is a clinical trial for OKV-119, which is an implant for cats that continually releases GLP-1s. And I guess over 50% of cats are overweight these days. So we had the GLP-1s that started several years ago. And then at the same time, there's this trend that's been happening of people starting to treat their pets like humans. So that's launched a whole category of pet food and services and devices. And now we're taking it a step further and getting them on GLP-1s. So the thing you want to think about with that is like, what are the implications of that? What is that going to mean for my business or for what the product I'm trying to design? And you ask us, so what? So, the so what is, what if we actually broadened our healthcare services and products to other living beings? That's just one so what. I'm sure there's 10, 15, 20, but you always want to think about the implications for the signals. And then the other one I pulled was this one, which is a little interesting. I don't know if you all have seen the increase in gambling opportunities, even the online things you can gamble. You can gamble anytime, anywhere. But an interesting one is that now offshore bookmakers are offering odds on children's, oh, yes, I see the comment. Children involving like Little League, you can bet on Little League games for kids. So, I mean, for me, what I thought is like, okay, the so what is okay, so if this increase in gambling is happening and it's being applied to children and in more locations, it's omni-channel, it's everywhere. Are we creating more opportunities for addiction in our country? Which, like, if you follow it out into like a kind of like a 5 to 10 year scenario, are we increasing our healthcare costs, like to treat addiction? Do we have the resources to actually do that? We might need to think about that.
And then one person brought up the Super Bowl commercials, and sort of where that might lead us of like what's being highlighted and how it's being highlighted.
That's a really good
Great
example.
opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna just leave us with this in case you have questions about signals, trends, and drivers, which is usually the thing that people are the most confused about. Um, I would think about it in terms of the who, the what, and the why. And the signals, I will call the who, because one thing you can look at besides physical objects or things you see around you is who are the early adopters, who are the innovators. I mean, in a great example, uh, maybe not from today's world, a few years ago would be Elon Musk. Elon Musk was especially, has a, or Steve Jobs, somebody they're using things first, they're innovators, they're trying new things first. But and again, like the signals can be a range, like examples would be a range of beauty products or a unique shared office space in New York. Like even the debut of restaurants is all like, okay, is Thai food becoming more popular? Or tacos. Tacos in the United States are really in right now. Everyone wants to go get tacos. So what does that mean? But look at randomness, and that kind of hints at something that's bigger, and the idea is to do quantity over quality. Um, and then trends are the what. It's like, how does that collection of signals get contextualized as a shift in our culture or shift in like the economy or something, so that its presence gains traction and context and legitimacy. So I put an example called bleisure, which is a combination of business and leisure. People taking business trips for leisure has really grown. And then the why, that's the driver. It's how that trend or that collection of signals manifests itself in the greater culture. And it might seem marginal or it might seem irrelevant, but you want to pay attention to it because it becomes larger and more concerning and then reaches what we often call a tipping point. And I think, Kelly, this is you, or is this?
That's you, and then I start on the next one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what do we do with all of that information? Imagine you've got all this great research. You're thinking about your stakeholders, you're thinking about the biases. The next step before we actually take some type of action is just to get clarity on what we're actually trying to think about in terms of the domain that we're going to focus on. You want to make sure that you and your team or the business is really clear on where you're trying to go. I can give you a quick example of something I've been working on for a long time is food as medicine. And food as medicine has probably 50 different definitions. Like one person's going to think food as medicine is all about farm to table, or one person's going to think it's like all about health equity and food deserts. But if you get a group of people together and each person is thinking about it from that perspective, it doesn't really help us be aligned on the topic that we actually need to understand. So we'll just call this framing future conversations. And you can do a couple of different exercises to help you frame things. But the idea is to get it to spark curiosity and to get people talking and just clarify. And some of the things that the implications of doing this is taking the time to actually understand where you're trying to go is incredibly helpful. And the purpose is to define it what we want to investigate more to get people aligned, kind of like I just said, and to establish a shared language to get people to use the same terminology and have the same understanding of things. And that allows you then to create a foundation for taking action, whether it's development of concepts, roadmaps, backcasting, or scenarios. And I think in the next section, Kelly has a really great use case from the Cole Children's Museum about some of the concepts that they came up with and decided to take action.
And so one of the things that Rebecca sort of stressed throughout is you're not doing this in a vacuum. You're really doing it with the intent of moving your business forward in some way. And one of the things we did for the Cole Children's Museum, so this was coming out of COVID, and they, in the past, 50% of their budget was from people coming into the museum. It's a museum kind of out in the suburbs, in the Chicagoland area or the greater Chicago area. And they were like, uh-oh, we're in trouble because up until this point, we relied on people walking through the door to survive. And we realize how locally based we are. And so one of the sort of areas that we had explored with them, and so on the front end, we'd done, a lot of trend analysis. We also did some interviews and did some sort of focus group sessions with different patrons and the educators there. And they had been trapped kind of between the walls. Like they have a physical location, that's what they'd really depended on. And so the opposite of that was sort of say, what does it look like if we expand beyond the walls? That also, because of the physicality of their location, made them really accessible to a few. You have to drive there. It's not near public transportation. Not a lot of people have the opportunity necessarily to drive out to the suburbs to go to a museum. So if they challenge themselves to say, what would the future look like if we are accessible to many? And so we sort of mapped these two axes and said, okay, what lives in each quadrant? And I think this is a really important thing to do. When Rebecca talked about getting aligned, we had a conversation around, okay, if it's accessible to many and it's between the wall, it's an all access destination, right? We're still physically bound, but we're making ourselves as accessible as possible. And then if we are beyond the walls and accessible to many, maybe we're always there. We're a companion to parents. We're a companion to educators. So we kind of aligned around what type of thing might live in each quadrant. And then we brainstormed lots of concepts around that in a typical sort of ideation session. And one of the things that really comes out of this is the conversations are as rich, frankly, as the concepts themselves, because you are aligning on what could the future look like and what would that sort of the so what for our organization. And so from that, we then came up with a lot of different concepts, but one of them was called, Cole Children's Museum in the Community. So these are hands-on experiences that capture the essence of what they have to offer because they're a very rich museum with lots of sort of strong knowledge base in many different areas, science and music. And so how do they really spread that into the community and beyond? And so this was just a quick concept that the team came up with around, hey, what if we took some of our packaged museum experiences and put them in malls? Malls in the United States, and I think Mexico's sort of had this challenge a bit as well. And some other, large urban areas, they're not as popular as they once were. And so this is a great opportunity to kind of build a new experience, partner with malls that now have empty spaces, and really have these kind of pop-up areas. And so we could have these commercial installations. They could be at the airport, they could be at fairs, they could be in a lot of different places that really help people understand the value of the Cole Children's Museum. And so they even sort of said, some of these activities you could do with a caregiver, a babysitter, a parent. And then we talked about the potential impact, right? Of like, what does this look like down the road and what would success look like? So increasing visibility, educating children through play at home, and really expanding parent involvement through kits that we might deliver at home as well. So we really are pushing everything that the museum has to offer beyond the walls. And then strategic partnerships with business owners or community leaders. And then what are some considerations that we have to think about? And then on the right, before this, we had sort of established design principles of what's important to us to accomplish with our new concepts or new offerings that we might bring. And so there's different elements or attributes, like it needs to be experiential. It needs to build on our sort of information knowledge base, it needs to be flexible, collaborative, supportive, and inclusive. And so these were the things that we said are important values and attributes for the design, and then each concept kind of mapped across those attributes differently. But this helped them make decisions that were then strategically aligned with the direction that they wanted to go as an organization. So that's just kind of quick example of helping to bring this to life of how the research and trends and signals and drivers might then culminate in a type of activity or strategic exercise that you would do with an organization. And so that's it for us as far as what we wanted to cover today on foresight. And certainly people are always welcome to reach out to learn more. But we want to see if you have any questions.